Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here tonight. So thanks to Protect the Planet and also to the university here that you invited me. Yeah, as Fenya said, it's been a while since I've actually been to a university, to like an audience room. So it's quite, cool for me to be back at uni. I'm a finance campaigner at the environmental and human rights organization Urgewald. I don't know, has any one of you ever heard Urgewald before? Does it ring a bell? Okay, but that's good because I'm going to talk for about an hour about Urgewald. So you will know everything what we're doing after this presentation, hopefully. So the title for this presentation is Following the Money Pipeline. So it will be a lot on fossil fuel industry and on finance. So bear with me, it might also be a bit technical from time to time. And before I go into the topic, I just wanted to say a few words on Urgewald. So as I said, it's a German-based NGO. We have 3 offices right now in Germany, one in Berlin, one in Cologne, and one in the village Sassenberg, which is close to Münster. Urgewald was founded about 30 years ago, and we have by now grown into a very big team. So we're about 60 to 70 people by now. And have been working on fossil fuel and finance for quite some time. To kick it off, I brought you this picture. And there's a reason to it. So when we think about the climate crisis, we very often tend to think about fossil fuel companies, about CO2, about oil, gas, coal, etc. But we rarely actually take into account where is the money coming from. So we rarely think about banks, asset managers, insurance companies, etc. But in fact, every single fossil fuel project needs finance to be implemented in the end. So this photo was taken just a few, I think 2 weeks ago in the wildfires in California. I guess you've all read about that. They are still ongoing. It's devastating. And you can see here one of the Bank of America branches burning down, which is quite ironic because just a few days before this picture was taken, Bank of America, alongside other very big US banks, exited the Net Zero Banking Alliance. So this is kind of an UN alliance where banks commit to align their lending and investment portfolio to net zero by 2050. So I think it, very perfectly clear illustrates the situation that we're in. So the world is kind of burning down, and at the same time we're seeing this ESG backlash all over the world, especially in the US, also with the Trump administration that just started. And before I go into our data work, I just included a few slides because I think they're very important to mention to see how Urgewald works and what we kind of base all our data work on. So what you can see here is the CO2 emissions committed by already developed gas, oil and gas fields and coal mines. So the gray bar on the right-hand side shows all the CO2 that will be out there by fields that we are already exploiting. So I'm not talking about anything new yet. And on the right-hand side, you can see these red lines where it shows you the carbon budget that we have left for 1.5 or 2 degrees. So we can see this is already making our carbon budget implode. But this is not the whole story yet, even though it's worrying enough. This is a map of fossil fuel projects all over the world that are currently planned. So this adds up to this gray bar that I just showed you. And these around 100 projects that are showed here would again, like just these projects here alone, would make our carbon budget, use up our carbon budget again. So you might have heard that, sorry, I can't find the mouse here. So putting this all together, I hope this animation works. Let's see, This is a graph by the International, I have to look again, International Institute for Sustainable Development, and it shows two pathways which are like which align to a 1.5 pathway, and we can see quite perfectly here that the blue area is not included. So it's quite clear that new fossil fuel projects, should not be done. And translated this into scientific terms, actually the International Energy Agency came up with a net zero roadmap in 2021, which marks kind of a clear red line for new fossil fuel projects, which is 2022. So from 2022 on, if we are to reach our climate targets, there can't be any no new coal plants or mines, no new oil or gas fields. And they were also quite clear on a coal phase out. So when we have to finally end coal, which is 2030 for OECD countries and 2040 for globally. And coming back to finance, the executive director of the IEA said when the report was published, if governments are serious about the climate crisis, there can be no new investments in oil, gas and coal from this year. Yeah, as I said in the beginning, if a fossil fuel company is planning to do a new project, be it a coal power plant, an oil and gas field, they can't finance it alone. So typically, only 25 to 30% of the costs come from their own capital, so from equity, and around 2/3, so the rest, is funded through debt. So in other words, the financial industry is really crucial. And as we've seen that the fossil fuel industry is not really transforming, and it's also kind of logical for them because it's their business model, banks can actually move to another sector with their money. So what Urgewald has been trying to do for the past 30 years is to cut off the money pipeline for fossil fuel companies. And how do we do it? So we have kind of three pillars that we base our work on. The first one is good comprehensive data. So we have a very large research team researching on the fossil fuel industry as well as the finance industry. Then the second one is, of course, advocacy towards financial institutions. And the third one is public pressure and campaigning, which is part of my job. Because in the end, we know that the biggest enemy of every company and of every financial institution is reputational risk. So we try to push this, push it up. So to be able to cut off companies from financing, you first need to know who actually is the so-called fossil fuel industry. Because we've experienced in the past when talking to financial institutions, when talking to banks, that they sometimes don't know themselves what is in their portfolio and what the companies in their portfolio are actually doing. Because to them, it's just numbers and not like real life events. So I don't know whether you know the Netflix series, Is It Cake? If you don't know, they basically try to make cakes look like real world objects, and then it's actually cake. And sometimes this is what happens to the fossil fuel industry. So we kind of created our Urgewald version to that. So sometimes, it might look like another company, but then in the end, it's actually coal. And I also brought you an example for that. So the company Asia Green Energy, they are promoting their slogan, "The future is green energy." And that, of course, sounds very, very promising. But actually, if you look at the data, they make more than 90% of their revenue from coal. So it's a coal company in the end. And that's why Urgewald years ago came up with an idea of creating like a global coal exit list or an divestment exit list, so to say. And it's really a quite unique database because it covers the whole value chain of coal. So it covers mining, transport and logistics, as well as power generation. So upstream, midstream, downstream. And which companies actually end up on GCEL? That's what we call it. So that's kind of the shortcut for a global coal exit list. So as I said, we focus very much on our data work on expansion. So expansion criteria is one of the first ones. So if a company is developing a new coal mine, a new coal power plant, then it will end up on GCEL. And then there is a relative criteria and an absolute criteria. So you can also have a look at the GCEL, how much money a company is making out of coal and how much coal production in absolute terms they are making. And as I said, it's quite unique also because this database is open for everyone. So it's not hidden behind a paywall. You can actually go on coalexit.org, the link on the screen, and have a look at, I don't know, your national coal company, for example, and check it out, what they're planning to do in the future. It also brings transparency into the discussion of, is the industry actually transforming? Are we seeing some kind of phase out or not? Spoiler, no. And third, it also helps financial institutions and other stakeholders to formulate exclusion criteria. So we actually work with lots of financial institutions. You can see around 600 financial institutions are currently registered users. So we see that there is quite a big need for this data because the financial institutions are not doing it themselves, and sometimes coal companies are quite good at hiding. So I brought you a little question. What do you think? How many out of the 1,500 coal companies are developing new coal projects? Maybe let's do a little hand raising so I can see what the vibe in the room is. Unfortunately, Zoom people cannot participate. What do you think? Is it more than 20%? Okay, who is for less than 20%? Okay, more than 40%? Okay, more than 80%? Okay, yeah. So with coal, it's actually better than with oil and gas. You'll see that in a minute. So 40% out of the 1,500 coal companies on our list are currently developing new coal projects. And then one more. As we've seen, the science is quite clear on when coal should be phased out. So I also brought you the question of how many coal companies on GCEL have adopted a coal phase-out date, so will end their coal business completely. What would you think here? More than 10%? Less than 10%? More than 50%? More than 80%? Okay, not really clear answer from the room. So it's actually only 5% of companies on GCEL that have adopted such a coal phase out. So yeah, that's not, that doesn't really sound promising. And just to add on to that, we recently, that list is younger. We've started the coal work like, years ago. And with oil and gas, it's a different picture, but now we also have the global oil and gas exit list. So it again covers upstream, midstream, and downstream. And again, it's accessible for everyone. So you can go on GOGEL.org to like download the whole Excel sheet and check it out if you're interested. And we see that we have less financial institutions using that one, which is basically due to how long we are publishing this list. So it's just a younger data project of ours. Yeah. And let's do the same thing with the oil and gas, just to have also a comparison between coal and oil and gas. So what would you think? How many of the 1,700 oil and gas companies are developing new projects? More than 20%? Okay, more than 50? More than 80? Yeah, so it's quite bad with oil and gas. You could say that pretty much every oil and gas company that is out there is still doing new projects. Yeah, in summary, most of the industry is in denial. And I think it's also a good argument if you ever happen to be in a discussion with, I don't know, someone from the financial industry who says, well, we shouldn't divest, we should engage, because otherwise we don't have a say in what the company is doing. I think like the data that I've just shown you is that it's too late for engagement, the industry is not transforming, and it's now time to divest. Yeah, I thought I would just show you who is kind of the target of our data work. So of course it's you as like the general public, it's media to just have more transparency out there. But actually, as I said, kind of the main users are financial institutions, our central banks, our financial market authorities who really use that work to see how big is the exposure of a financial sector to oil, gas, and coal, because also a lot of risk is involved with that. Yeah. So coming back to our initial theory of change, as you know, we want to shift trillions, and of course, this is not an easy task. So these are probably one of the most powerful institutions that we're here fighting against. But we're also seeing some progress. So as you can see, since we've launched these data projects, 90 financial institutions have adopted a Paris-aligned coal exit date, and 39 financial institutions, 39 new oil and gas policies were adopted since GOGEL was launched. Yeah, now I will go on to to the part of who's actually funding this industry. So you can see that the global coal exit list and the global coal oil and gas list are both kind of the basis for our finance research, because what we actually do is we look at bank research and investor research, so the loans and underwritings and the shares and bond holding that is kind of going into that industry. And I will just try to explain it in a more simplified version maybe. So as you know, there's different financial players out there, commercial banks, central banks, insurance companies, asset owners, asset managers, etc. And they provide money in one way or the other to these companies. And then we look at, okay, what type of money are they kind of providing to this industry? So we kind of differentiate between loans underwriting, so the banking research, which goes into our Banking on Climate Chaos report. And then we look at share and bond holding, which is what we call passive money, and that goes into our Investing in Climate Chaos report, so banking and investments. So I just put a screenshot here of our latest Banking on Climate Chaos report. Again, this is all open source. Everyone here can take a look at it. If you go on bankingonclimatechaos.org, you can play around with the data. You can look at the bank that you might have an account at. You can see kind of the involvement between 2016 and 2023, because we are always taking kind of the Paris Agreement as our point to start with our research. And then you can see on the next slide what we call the dirty dozen. So the worst banks since the Paris Agreement. So you can see lots of US banks there, but also some European banks or British banks as Barclays or HSBC. UBS is a Swiss bank. And then one of our latest projects is specifically looking at coal, so looking at loans, underwritings to the coal industry. So I put here the example of an Italian bank, Intesa Sanpaolo, and you can see all of their clients in the past years from 2021 to 2023. And as we can see here, Intesa Sanpaolo provided around 600 million US dollar to the coal industry. Yeah, and as I said, with coal, it's different to oil and gas. We can actually see in the European context a sharp decline in coal financing. But as you can see here in China, it's a different picture. And also the US is still financing coal. So Europe is not within like the larger finance series. And then the last kind of data project that I want to show you is Investing in Climate Chaos. So as I said, that looks at share and bond holding. And again, it's open source. You can go on investinginclimatechaos.org. You can have a look at a specific company, for example, so who's financing a specific company, but you can also look for a financial institution and see how heavy is this financial institution invested in fossil fuels. So this is Deutsche Bank, and yeah, that's one of the, I guess, tough ones. So you can see also, you can click on whether you want like the whole fossil fuel sector or just oil and gas or coal. And yeah, we see kind of the who is who of the destructive industry here. So Total Energies, you might be familiar with this French fossil fuel company, ExxonMobil, etc., Shell. Yeah, we know the names. And maybe just to give you another question, because it always blows my mind, the number that I will show you. What do you think, how much money was invested into coal, oil and gas companies in 2024? Would you say, I don't know, more than 50 billion? Less than 50 billion? More than 500 billion? Any suggestions? Yeah. So in the end, it's actually 5,100 billion that were, like, as of 2024, invested in coal, oil, and gas companies, which is, I think, crazy and not really tangible. So I always bring an example to like let the numbers sink. So if you had that amount of money and you spent $1 million every single day, it would still take you 14,000 years to use up all the money. So that's what this is about. Just a very quick note on data aggregation. If you ever want to use our data, you will never find subsidiaries, but only parent companies. So if you, for example, look for Duke Energy Florida, you will not find Duke Energy Florida, but only Duke Energy Corporation. But in any case, if you ever come across like a company that you're really interested in and that is a subsidiary, you can always email us and we can provide the data for you in case you, I don't know, want to do a research project or whatever. Yeah, and to finish off with the toolbox that I kind of, given you an insight in, I've talked about the ones on the left already, and I just want to show you 3 more, which are really handy also for consumers, I think, so all of you. This is a data project done by our French partner Reclaim Finance. It tracks the policies, so the coal policies of financial institutions. So here I just put a screenshot of different financial institutions, and you can see is, I don't know, a certain bank still providing finance for fossil fuel projects? Or is my financial institutions, my bank, still providing finance to companies that are expanding? Or have they set a phase-out date, for example? So that's what you can see here, and they kind of give points from 0 to 10, depending on how robust this policy is. And they do the same thing also with oil and gas. And you can also see for the nerdy ones in here, they also track policies on unconventional production. So for example, fracking, you might have heard that, which is quite like a very, very harmful way to extract oil and gas. Or for example, Arctic oil and gas, which also counts to the unconventional sector. Yeah, and this one is specifically, for consumers. It's currently only available in German, unfortunately. If you go on datenbank.fairefos.info, you can actually see every single fund that is out there and see how much the percentage of controversial companies within a specific fund. So if you ever wondered, is the ESG fund that I'm like putting my savings into actually investing into green projects, or is it actually more into oil, gas, and other destructive industries? Then you can have a look at that and just look for the name or the ISIN. Every fund has a specific ISIN, so a specific number. And that I think is quite useful, at least. Yeah, and now on to a very practical example that I wanted to give. So as I said, I'm a finance campaigner, so I kind of use all of that data work. I'm not doing it myself, but I use all of that data work for campaigning. And I brought you one example of a campaign that I'm currently working on. It's with our partner organization in the Philippines. So we very often actually work with partner organizations from the Global South because that's where the destructive projects happen. And most of the time they're not in Europe. But the finance very often comes from Europe. So often it's a project, for example, a new gas power plant built somewhere in the Philippines, and then the financiers, they sit in Europe. So yeah, this specific project is about the gas expansion in the Verde Island Passage. What is the Verde Island Passage? It's one of the richest marine biodiversity hotspots in the world. A lot of scientists actually call it the Amazon of the oceans because it's kind of like what the Amazon is to the land biodiversity. This is the Verde Island Passage is kind of what the similar thing for my marine biodiversity. And just to give you like a tiny glimpse into how big this expansion is. So every dot here represents either a fossil fuel, a gas power plant, or an LNG terminal. I don't know whether you're familiar with LNG. That's the new thing that everyone is kind of also in Europe fighting for currently. So it's liquefied natural gas. Yeah, and most of these dots are actually in the Verde Island Passage, so this passage that I just showed you. And maybe to also give you a little bit of background on the Philippines itself. So the Philippines used to heavily rely on coal for their energy provision, but then the civil society worked very, very hard to get like a coal moratorium, so to end any new coal expansion in the Philippines. And now what the fossil fuel industry is kind of doing, so it's the same companies that were behind the coal expansion, and now they're just going for fossil fuels because they know they can make a lot of money with it. Yeah, and trying to replace coal with gas instead of renewables. And just to give you also an insight on the potential of renewables in the Philippines. So you can see it's massive. And also given the country's like island-based geography, renewables would definitely be the better option because you can't build like LNG pipelines, gas pipelines to every single one of these little islands. So yeah, you kind of need a decentralized energy system, which are renewables per se. Yeah, and I thought if it works, I will just show you this video, which was done by the Filipino partner organization. One second. Okay. Maybe you can send the link into the group chat because the audio is not working in Zoom, I think. Okay, let's see. Where's the mouse? What's that? Don't allow? Okay. Okay, let's see whether the sound works. Yeah, as you can see, it goes on for another 4 minutes. So if you want to watch it, you can do that alone, but I think that will be too long for now. So I will just try to switch to the presentation again. It did work before. Ah, yeah, here we go. Yeah, so as you can see, it's also actually one of the most well-known diving hotspots, the Verde Island Passage. Yeah, and who are the companies behind that? So one of the companies responsible for this massive gas expansion is San Miguel. And again, you might not actually think of San Miguel, if you even know San Miguel, for fossil fuel expansion, but maybe for beer. So that's kind of what these companies tend to do. They yeah, operate in many different sectors. But actually, San Miguel Corporation is also doing fossil fuels on a massive scale, in particular in the Philippines. Yeah, and it shows again that, yeah, sometimes fossil fuel companies are not visible at first hand. So when we do campaigns, what we kind of do is we look through these three doors. So we look at project loans, which are loans that are given directly for a specific project. We look at corporate loans, so who are just the financiers behind a specific company, because this way, with the corporate loans, the company can decide for themselves what to do with the money. And we also look at share and bonds, so who are the investors behind the company. And we did that for San Miguel, of course. And of course, also, as you've seen in the video, a few European institutions pop up quite often, which is Standard Chartered, who is the biggest financier of San Miguel, UBS, the Swiss bank, which is one of the biggest investors and financiers. And then we've also seen HSBC, Allianz, one of the Allianz subsidiaries actually, and DWS. And once we finished our data work, we start campaigning. And what this kind of looks like is we kind of try to make it as painful as possible for financial institutions to hold on to their investments. So here you can see pictures of our last year's AGM tour. AGM is the annual general meetings of financial institutions. So we actually attend their shareholder meetings where all of the shareholders come together, and then we bring like the affected communities to these shareholder meetings to speak up, and we also speak ourselves. Yeah, and then what we of course also do is media work, online campaigning. You can check out the Protect VIP Now Instagram page if you're interested. Yeah, and then like it sometimes takes months to years to move financial institutions, and not every institution is even, yeah, not all of them are moving, of course. But we have seen some results in this campaign. So DWS actually announced after our 2023 AGM tour, so the tour where we attended all of the shareholder meetings, that they've divested San Miguel Corporation, taken into account the latest environmental, social, and governance data, among other reasons. That's what they said to us. Then the French bank BNP Paribas told us that financing fossil gas projects in the Philippines is not part of their strategy. And one of the latest successes we had was in Austria. The biggest bank in Austria, Erste Group, said during their shareholder meeting that they divested San Miguel due to financial and sustainability reasons. Yeah, and with that, I'm coming to an end. So I just wanted to show you a few slides on our successes, so what we've done so far, and try to make them, yeah, more measurable, more tangible. So we see that investors with more than 20 trillion assets under management apply at least one of our divestment criteria. And over 90 financial institutions exclude coal developers. Coal developers are the ones that are still expanding their business. But of course, there's still much to do. Here are a few examples of how our data is being used. So for example, MSCI, I don't know, a few of you might know it, is using our data. Ostrom, which is a French asset manager, is using our data in their coal criteria, oil and gas criteria. We've also seen quite huge divestment steps. So the Norwegian pension fund in 2015, I think, after our campaign, divested from coal. And also Allianz is not insuring coal projects anymore and is also divesting from coal. And I think this is actually quite remarkable, and I always finish off with that. So as I said, oil and gas is still, there's still a lot to do for oil and gas, but for coal, we've really seen that since kind of our campaign work started, since our lists were published, of course, also other NGOs working on that, we've seen that since the Paris Agreement, the coal financing in Europe has decreased by more than 50%. So coal is really not a thing anymore to do in Europe, and actually coal companies are increasingly struggling to actually find finance. Yeah, and now we just have to do the same with oil and gas. And that's how I finish. You can, of course, contact me if you ever need like further information on any of the tools or are interested in our data projects. Yeah, and now I think we have plenty of time for discussion and questions and yeah, whatever is on your mind. Thank you very much. Maybe we'll start whether anyone here in the room has a question.
Okay, we have to share a microphone, unfortunately. You'll have to deal with that. Okay, thank you very much, first of all. That was amazing and very interesting. I hope that's the case for everyone in the room and in Zoom. I expect it to be. About the Q&A, we have people in Zoom and on YouTube and in the room. And we have Mika with a microphone for the room running around here. And also, if you have any questions in Zoom, feel free to just put them in the chat or in YouTube as well. I'm watching and I'm reading it, and I'll, yeah, make sure everything gets heard. Okay. Does anyone have a question in the room first? Ah, you have. Yeah, perfect. Go on. Go on.
First of all, thank you very much for the very interesting topic. I have kind of like a controversial commentary, maybe. Um, there is a claim for many other countries that develop later that they say they have the right to exploit right now the coal since they didn't contaminate or they were not the first responsible for the contamination that we are facing nowadays. What will your thoughts will be on this topic?
Yeah, thank you so much. I don't think it's controversial. I totally see your point. And actually, Urgewald would never oppose a project in a country where there's no, like, not people from the country approaching us. So we always do campaigns just like when they're not in Europe, when they're in the global south, for example, when there's people who are actually opposing certain projects, certain industries, and then we just help them and kind of do the European work around that. But we're not like, okay, in the Philippines you can't have gas if you want it, but rather like there are people who are actually dependent on this passage, who are dependent on yeah, fish, for example, like lots of fishing communities there. And they are increasingly losing kind of their reality of life. So actually this last year in 2024, one of the fishermen from the Philippines came and spoke at the AGM. So we also try to have like these people there to speak for us and not us as kind of Europeans to talk about what's happening in their country. So it's, I really see the point, and I think we always have to take that in mind, of course. Yeah.
So we have another question in the room. Mika is just going over there.
Hi, thanks so much. It was a very interesting presentation. I just wanted to get a sense of your sentiment because your proximity to financial players. I think given the latest developments, including Trump's inauguration speech where he's going to drill baby drill, what is your sentiment and outlook on uh, financial companies with respect to phasing out coal, etc.? Are they still on track, or are they having a complete turn on some of the commitments that they have made?
Sorry, can you just repeat the second part, because I had difficulty with this understanding.
Okay.
Maybe you can have the microphone a bit closer.
Okay, I just want to get a sense of your sentiment of companies, whether they are still sticking to the commitment, or are they more prepared to just abandon their commitments given a more oil-friendly environment that they have.
You
right
mean
now.
whether coal companies are sticking to their phase outs, or whether they are now
Financial companies actually, whether they are
financial companies?
Yeah, whether they're okay to divest.
So
Thank you.
I think with the financial companies, I mean, I've showed you in the beginning that we are seeing this kind of backlash from, of course, because like financial companies also operate in like a certain society and depend on politics, etc. So we do see a kind of backlash with, yeah, what's happening in, for example, US with the Trump administration, and him saying we're gonna drill baby drill in the next few years. But I think what's also worth mentioning is that for example, Net Zero Banking Alliance, so these very big US banks that exited the alliance, they were never heroes to begin with. So I mean, this alliance per se is quite controversial because everything what they do is voluntarily. So I think it actually kind of opens a room for European institutions to now implement more stringent policies, because they always used to say, okay, we have to get everyone on board, also the big players, and that's why we can't be more robust on our exclusion criteria, for example. But they have been financing coal, oil, and gas in the past years, even though they were part of the alliance. So it was more of a greenwashing thing, as everyone was talking about climate. So they kind of hopped on the bandwagon. So I think it actually, of course, we have to acknowledge that this is happening, but at the same time, we're still seeing European institutions that are actually taking this more from a risk factor, from a risk perspective, and say, okay, if we now invest into new oil and gas or coal projects, this will end up as a stranded asset. So I think in Europe, we're not seeing this backlash yet. I don't know whether it will happen, but I think it's a different, definitely kind of a different context comparing the US to Europe.
Do financial institutions really claim that it is a risk to invest in oil and other types of fossil fuel developments, let's say, or companies? When if we look at the S&P global oil index, it's done plus 60% in the last 3 years, and the S&P global clean energy index has done minus 60%. So it to me, it sounds strange that financial institutions would claim that.
I mean, you always have to take into context what's also happening on the political side. So, of course, if, for example, the Green New Deal is not going to be implemented as it should be implemented, then it's like fossil fuel companies can make money out of oil and gas for way longer. But if we actually stick to certain climate targets, then of course at some point we just have to end certain industries, and then it will become a stranded asset. Not now, but maybe in 20 years' time. And I think, adding to your question, of course it's not only like the risk factor that we are kind of, that financial institutions are basing their decisions on, but most of the time it's also reputational risk, as I said. So none of these financial institutions are doing this because, I don't know, they just have a good soul, or maybe some are. But I think lots of what we have been seeing in the past years is also because we're calling them out, because they are kind of branding their funds as ESG fund, as, I don't know, Protect the Planet Fund, whatever. But in the end, they are heavily invested in oil and gas. So I think it's also just adding transparency, and then they have to act on it, because what financial institutions in the end depend on is trust, because no one would like give their money to a bank which is not trustworthy. So they kind of really are not happy if they're called out, if there is bad publicity, etc. So yeah.
So these days, especially young people are using neobanks or neo-brokers. I was quickly going through your tools, but couldn't find any of them, like N26 or Revolut. So I was wondering whether you have any data also how they are dealing with such investments, or like, do they even do that?
I don't think that we cover brokers on our data tools. I mean, what we do cover on the, so if we talk about passive investments, for example, ETF, which is kind of the thing today where all people are invested in, you can find it on our uh, the Fair Funds database. So you can find passive investment products there, but I don't think they're, as far as I know, not included in the bigger institutional investor reports. Yeah.
Just quickly, there are no questions in Zoom. I hope there is no technical error or something like this. If there is, reach out to me. Otherwise, please go on.
Yeah, thank you for the talk from me as well. Because you said I'm always wondering in these contexts, because like within like a larger context, I can understand why people don't care about climate change, like maybe poor people like who just don't see the reality, but like in this context where you like just specifically choose like a coal plant to build and you invest money into it, I'm wondering, like, do you have any insight in the minds of the people who make this decision? Because this is truly mind-boggling to me. I never understand why people make this decision. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think it really, again, depends on different actors, different players. So there are financial institutions that don't give a shit, of course. No matter who you bring there at the shareholder meeting, no matter how destructive a certain project might be. But I think what we've seen from like the discussions that we've had for the past years with financial institutions is that very oftentimes for them, this is just a number, like giving out a loan, investing in something is just a number. And it's really sometimes changing their minds if they actually have a person sitting in front of them who is like directly affected from a company's fossil fuel expansion. For example, the fisherman. So we were at the UBS in Switzerland at the UBS AGM last year. And when he was speaking, it was really like you could feel the room changed. And at some, like, this kind of gave a face and a reality to the number that the bank is looking at. And I think this is kind of the crucial point about campaigning, to actually adding faces, adding emotions, adding real life realities of people to the bank account, to the portfolio.
That's really interesting. Thank you.
More questions here in the lecture hall? Yeah.
Even if we now assume that financial institutions would take the short-term disadvantage of profit loss because they think there's a higher risk that later they will have larger losses. Did you look at whether there are enough institutions on the other side or other companies like in the clean energy industry who would be able to take up those investments? Because when we say 5 trillion in fossil fuel, that's a lot of money. Is there somebody else who can spend it?
Yeah, so we're actually working on a data project right now to give like an insight into like how much money financial institutions are investing into renewables compared to fossil fuels, to also give a bit on transparency on that. And I think like I can just maybe say something from the Austrian context, as we are currently having discussions with an Austrian bank. And there's actually a huge need, because I mean, we hear that all the time in the media that decarbonization will take trillions of dollars and it will cost us so much. So I think, for example, in Austria, wind energy, solar energy has been like, yeah, rapidly growing in the past years, and there is quite a big need for investments. And we also see, we actually see that financial institutions are also increasing their money towards this sector. But the problem is that not like it should be that at the same time as they are increasing their money towards the renewable sector, they should be decreasing it for the fossil fuel sector. But what we see right now is that both are just still going up. So it's not like a crowding out effect yet, you see? So it's more like, okay, we're gonna do a few renewable projects, but we're also still gonna stick to oil and gas and coal. So I think we're still waiting for the crowding out effect. But in Europe, I actually just read today that 50% in Europe's power supply was renewables, and only 10% was coal for the last year. So we see that there is quite something happening. And in China, actually, oil peaked last year. I mean, they still depend on coal, of course, but as the electric power sector for electric vehicles, etc., is like insanely growing. We saw that there was peak oil last year. Yeah.
Are there any more questions? I always like to hear about something peaking because it means it's going down afterwards. I mean, of course, it's still very bad, but at least we are like going somewhere. Okay, last chance for the people in the Zoom who have been very like quiet today, which of course is fine as well. Okay, if nobody else has a question, I have a small question for like for closing the Q&A. Like I'm always like I'm a big fan of Urgewald. Yeah, we did a project together in October with the documentary that was made about you because of your 30th anniversary, I think it was. Well, where is Urgewald going next? Like what are your future projects going to be? Where are you heading to?
Yeah, as I said, we're now working on the oil and gas sector increasingly. Yeah, I don't know. I think the next years will be quite tough, not gonna lie. So we see right-wing extremist parties winning everywhere, and they're gonna change, of course, just the general vibe and society in which we operate, in which financial institutions operate. So I think not seeing a backlash in what we've already achieved would be quite good for the next year, to be realistic. But I also sometimes I'm quite hopeful, because I feel like from the last Trump administration, there was a lot of actually civil society engagement coming from that, and also in Austria, speaking from the last right-wing to conservative coalition we've had, like amazing and really, really big protests arise. And for Urgewald, I mean, we're already preparing this year's COP with a focus on Latin America, because it's going to happen in Brazil, and looking at what projects are happening there. I will be on the next AGM tour soon with our Filipino friends again. And I'm excited for what to come.